what's a good man? And the men say, protecting the people I love, providing for the people that I love, standing up for the little guy, right? These are having integrity. These very, I think, amazing qualities that we want to encourage our boys and men and really everyone, regardless of gender, to have. When he says, okay, what's a real man? Then he gets very different answers.
You're listening to the Mindful Mama podcast, episode number 207. Today, we're talking about mindful masculinity with Liz Plank. Welcome to the Mindful Mama podcast. Here, it's about becoming a less irritable, more joyful parent. At Mindful Mama, we know that you cannot give what you do not have. And when you have calm and peace within, then you can give it to your children. I'm your host, Hunter Clark-Fields, Mindful Mama Mentor. I help smart, thoughtful parents stay calm so they can have strong, connected relationships with their children. I've been practicing mindfulness for over 20 years. I'm the creator of the Mindful Parenting membership, and I'm the author of Raising Good Humans, a mindful guide to breaking the cycle of reactive parenting and raising kind, confident kids. Welcome back to the podcast, my friend. I am so glad you are here. This is going to be a really powerful episode, the first in a couple that we're doing about raising boys and looking at masculinity. And this is a special one, like in the community of people who are subscribed to the Mindful Mama newsletter. We have about 22,000 amazing people, and we have some amazing mindful men who I'm just giving a shout out to right here. You know who you are. So in just a moment, I'm going to be sitting down and talking to Liz Plank, and she's the author of For the Love of Men, a new vision for mindful masculinity, and an award-winning journalist, as well as the host of several acclaimed digital series at Vox Media. And she regularly appears on MSNBC, offering her perspective on national politics, disability, and women's issues. And in this episode, we're going to talk about this idea of the ideal masculinity and that box, right, that it puts men in, where men can have no vulnerability or weakness, no crying. They're always absolutely sure of themselves and they always win, and how it's actually hurting men and boys, and what we as parents can do to help change this. So I want you to listen for some really important ideas. This ideal masculinity ideas, these can really cripple boys' development and actually sabotage their success. And that many boys are suffering from undiagnosed mental health problems, and then looking at finally, what boys need most, and looking at emotional education. So this is going to be a very powerful episode. I invite you to share it with, if you're a female, to share it with all the men in your life, whatever gender you identify with, to share it around so we can start this conversation and really keep it going. Before we dive in, I just want to let you know that the Mindful Mama retreat is now open and people are grabbing their spots right away. So we have limited spots. We are going to be I'm holding a one-day retreat on March 21st in Philadelphia. I know I have some people flying in from Seattle. Shout out to you. You know who you are. And it's going to be very exciting. So you can get your ticket at mindfulmamamentor.com/retreat. And we will have early bird tickets available through February 15th only. And then after that, but they're pretty reasonable. So I'm so excited for you to come. If you want a day where you're really just a day to yourself to get into the big picture, we're going to be doing mindfulness practices. We're going to be working on mindful communication and really wonderful deep inner listening. We'll be doing yoga with one of my favorite yoga teachers. Not me, actually, a wonderful teacher I know I brought to Costa Rica last year, Mallory. So I hope you can make it. It's at mindfulmamamentor.com/retreat. And if you can't make it, we will be holding the Unmartyr Yourself Challenge after that in March, from March 24th through 30th. And you can sign up for that it's for anyone, anywhere in the world at mindfulmamamentor.com/unmartyr. That's UNMARTYR. And this is to help free ourselves from these harmful limiting beliefs. So join me. That's mindfulmamamentor.com/unmartyr. So I hope to see you there or at the retreat or both. That would be awesome. Amazing. So anyway, I hope you enjoy this episode. Let's dive in without further ado, my interview with Liz Plank. Liz Plank, thanks so much for coming on the Mindful Mama podcast.
I am so thrilled. I love mindfulness and I love mamas, so I couldn't be more thrilled.
So I'm so excited to talk to you about your book, For the Love of Men, but I have to ask a question first. So recently I was on the New Jersey Turnpike with my husband at the end of like the longest drive home ever from New England. And I put on a podcast interview that you did with, I can't remember who it was, but anyway, and we were listening to it, and then he's starting to get this like kind of stanky look on his face. And this is like a very smart, thoughtful guy. But he had an objection to like looking at half the population in this broad generalization. So I just wanted to kind of address that first. I thought that would be good to, do you have any problems with kind of speaking to half of humanity, or like, are there benefits to this that I can relate to him? So what do you think about that?
Well, I think, does he have the same issue with, us talking about the struggles that women as a group face? So, I'm guessing you have daughters, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do.
Daughters. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I guess I would ask him, does he have trouble with scholarship or with studies or with, experts basically talking about the struggles that are unique to the other half of the population, which is girls and women. And maybe he does, but I'm curious, maybe that's a good place to start. Well, or does he just have a problem with it when it's his half?
I don't know. That's a really good point, and I wish I had asked that question. I'm going to have to bring that up now. But I love what you talk about and with your book, and I love this idea of looking at masculinity itself and bringing men into the conversation. I definitely want to talk about also like boys and raising children too. But in the beginning of your book, you say that there's no greater threat to humankind than our current definitions of masculinity. So I was wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about like what are these definitions and why, I guess how they threaten women and how they threaten men are very different, right? So just talk to us a little bit about this. How is it a threat to mankind and these definitions of masculinity?
Yeah, well, I think that we have spent a lot of time talking about how bad it is for girls and women to grow up in a society where certain ideals are imposed onto them or certain restrictions are imposed onto them, right? So we have a really mainstream conversation about the importance of having women in all kinds of fields, right? In teaching and nursing, but also in engineering and in coding and in math. And we have a conversation about violence against women and violence against girls and how difficult it can be for women and girls around the world to grow up in a society where their safety is threatened, where their integrity is jeopardized, and where they're turned into objects, or that their violence is justified because they're girls, because they're women. We've been talking about rape culture. We've been talking about rape on campus, but some of the lies that support or encourage a kind of culture where girls and women are in danger. And I guess I've been having and participate in this conversation for a really long time. I've been a journalist for several years. I have a master's in gender and social policy. I've been writing and speaking about these issues for a really long time, and I'm very passionate about women. But I also think that we have forgotten, to your husband's point, the other half of the population who are also impacted by their gender, who are also instructed to act a certain way, to hide certain parts of themselves, to fulfill certain expectations. And those ideals can be just as threatening, can be just as diminishing and degrading for boys and men as I think they are for women and girls. So a lot of those expectations, range. I'm definitely, I don't think women and girls can be painted in one broad brush. The conversation around gender equality, I think, needs to be obviously intersectional. And we're not saying that every woman and every girl is oppressed in every in the exact same way in our society. We're saying that there are certain structures that we have in place. There are certain ways that our governments do policy. There are certain inequalities that are embedded in our institutions that create a certain kind of inequality, that create a certain kind of ideal that a lot of women and girls can't achieve. And so the same thing is happening with boys and men. When someone is pregnant, the first question that you ask them is it a boy or is it a girl? Even in 2019.
Even more now. It's so weird. Like when I had my daughters, there was no gender reveal thing. Like that was not a thing 10 years ago. I don't know where that came from.
Well, we give a lot of importance to gender, whether it's a girl or whether it's a boy or whether it's anything in between, right? So we will get that child certain gifts, right? We will choose certain toys, choose certain movies and films that they can watch, and those that are not acceptable for them to watch. So in America right now, and in many other parts of the world, but I'm specifically interested in the American context in the book. Most parents are more at ease seeing a boy play with a toy gun than a toy doll. There are a lot of parents who believe that it's child abuse to let your boy have manicures or to let him wear nail polish if he wants. To
really?
Let him bring a doll. Yeah, I mean, I documented in the book. American Girl, for example, which is obviously anyone who's a parent knows, is an incredibly huge company that is incredibly popular. Young girls love American Girl dolls, and the thing that was in most demand for American Girl was to have a boy doll, because there were many boys who were asking for a doll, and and wanted a boy doll that looked like them. And they finally put one out very recently. And you can, look at all of the backlash online. You can look at the backlash, and again, I detail it in the book, but you can Google it yourself. Even recently, Gabrielle Union and her husband shared a photo with their kids and around the holidays and around Thanksgiving, saying what they were grateful for. A very wholesome photo of them sharing the love that they have with their family. People noticed that their son was wearing nail polish or was wearing fake nails or whatever, and there were so many hateful comments, and that backlash was also documented. So a lot of people believe that it is against boys' nature to let them feel anything, to let them play with something that feels something, to encourage them to, to put it very plainly, explore their feminine energy. We have no problem with girls playing with monster trucks, with things that we traditionally deem as masculine. In fact, we encourage it. So why don't we encourage it for boys too?
It's so true. I mean, having girls right at this sort of moment, I can tell you there are so many resources to encourage girls to be brave and do all these different things. Exactly. and do STEM and do all kinds, there's just all this brave girl stuff. There is so much of it. And I have been wondering okay, where's the other side of it? So let's kind of talk about what is this box that we're putting men in and boys in? What are the ideals? Let's just define what it is that is this ideal masculinity.
Right. I'm just gonna wait for this airplane to pass. Sounds like it's right above my head.
That's okay. We'll edit that out.
Okay. So yeah, I think that again, just like with girls and women, there are expectations that are there out in the world. Some girls and women feel more of a pressure to respond to those expectations, depending on a wide set of, sort of variables from how they were raised, where they were raised, and what kind of personality they have. But for boys, so for girls, you talked about these books that are out there to encourage them to be more brave and to be more assertive, which, by the way, are, again, traditionally masculine. characteristics. There are characteristics that we associate with the masculine, right? Having more, confidence, being more assertive, saying what you want, saying what you need. These are things that we, not just for young girls, but even if we look at the Lean In movement and even, the wider movement, the wider women's movement, encouraging women to ask for, to demand to be paid equally to men, or to demand a certain negotiation or respect in the workplace. So to your point, there's a lot of support for women to overcome those ideals of femininity that tell us, don't take up too much space, don't say things, don't ask for what you want or else they won't like you. All of these ways, right? And there's actual punishment for women who do engage in being more assertive in the workplace. If you're a woman of color, particularly, it's even worse, right? You'll be labeled as not just as an angry woman, but the angry Black woman. So it's very difficult for a lot of women to sort of overcome the ideals that are even imposed onto them, even if they have worked out, their own way to liberate themselves from it. So for men, the ideals are absolutely, to be absolutely sure of yourself at every point, right? Vulnerability and showing weakness is basically, based on research from Brene Brown, who's the foremost expert on shame. Women experience shame because they're not perfect. Men experience shame because they're weak. So they are told from a very young age, right? If they show emotion, if they cry, boys don't cry. Stop doing that. Stop crying. So the message there being, there's something wrong with you when you do that, and you must stop, and you must make sure that no one sees you do this. And so these are, I think, traumatic experiences for a lot of boys, in the way that it's traumatic for a young girl to be told to be silent or to not take up space. I think that's not that does not promote child development. So boys are told to be, to always know what to say, not to ask questions. And these are, by the way, not things that I have come up with myself. These are, from a series of interviews that I've done. And also there's a lot of research out there that's available to really dissect these issues. There's the idea that you always have to win, that you have to dominate, that the way that it was explained to me was by Michael Kimmel, who's a masculinity professor and has been doing this work for years with men and boys. He's done this exercise with thousands and thousands of men, where he says, what's a good man? And the men say, protecting the people I love, providing for the people that I love, standing up for the little guy, right? These are having integrity. These very, I think, amazing qualities that we want to encourage our boys and men, and really everyone, regardless of gender, to have. When he says, okay, what's a real man? Then he gets very different answers from those same men. So that's when they'll start saying, always win, right? Get laid, dominate, always, be on top, right? That, and these are, again, being competitive and being aggressive. Sometimes those are worthy of the, situation that you're in. But that shouldn't be what you're expected to do all the time. And I think that it's that we see the difference, right? Where men, want to be good men, and boys want to be good boys, and they know what that feels like. But society and I think our culture is giving them a very different message about who they should be. And I think that is really a shame. I think that it's not so scarring for some men, and I think it's incredibly scarring for a lot of men. And I think that if we don't create space where we can talk about this, if we don't create space where we can have a curiosity about what it means to grow up as a boy in our society, then we're never going to solve women's problems, by the way, right? We're never going to solve any of the world's biggest problems, because what you see in the research is that, we're seeing a lot of groups that are not so good out there, right? The rise of the alt-right. We're seeing a lot of, groups on 4chan, on 8chan. We're seeing men go out and shoot up Walmarts because and having started their path to violence on these online threads. These groups are responding to real pain. These groups are responding to, I think, a real craving that a lot of young men have in our society to be heard and to have a sense of community and to be seen and to be celebrated. And I think that if we don't offer a positive conversation and a positive path for that, we're really setting them up to fail.
It's so frustrating because, from sort of outward appearances, right, this whole sort of setup seems to be working in men's favor, but it really isn't. It's only we're working for maybe the men who are at the very top, and who knows what it's really, of this hierarchy, and then who knows what it's like for them actually internally and in their day-to-day inner experience. And it's so damaging to, this idea that men have to be aggressive, men have to dominate. It's so damaging to everyone, to men, to women, and all of this. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's incredibly frustrating. So you talk about in that interview I heard with you, you talked about your experience, like kind of leading up to this work and wanting to start this conversation, which I'm so glad that you are putting out there in this really loving, beautiful way for men. You had an experience in high school in a very well-regarded elite high school that may have been something that sort of started you on this path. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I was pretty severely bullied as a teenage girl, and like everyone, I had bickering and conflicts with teenage girls, and that was the model of quote unquote toxicity that I was given, that girls go after other girls, and that's what girls do, and that's what bullying looks like. And of course I experienced some of that, but the most scarring and the most violent and the most traumatic form of bullying was actually all boys. And it started from, my best friend, who was, my age, and we were very, very good friends. And at a certain point, I think I got a boyfriend. That's the long story short. And then everything changed. He went from being the person that was the safest to me to being the person that was the least safe to me. And it was, death threats, it was threatening emails, it was cyberbullying even at the time, which, I have so much compassion for young people growing up in this day and age, because we didn't even have, Facebook and Snapchat, but even with what was available at the time, they're circulating photos and they're circulating, different hate messages. And so I ended up having to change schools, and I really never thought about that as a gendered experience. Like I didn't identify as a feminist, even though my mom was like this big feminist, and it was a constant, cause of conflict between the both of us. She'd be like, "Why aren't you a feminist?" And I was like, "I just don't," it was like not cool, to be a feminist. And I think that it was, I regarded it in the way that I think our mainstream culture regarded it at the time, which was like, unattractive, radical, hating men and all that stuff. And so, but only, I think, really with time and with a lot of reflection, first of all, was I able to be like, oh, I was bullied. And not just I was bullied, but like, this was, a form of obviously sexual harassment, and in some instances, sexual assault. But I had no language or honestly consciousness in which to understand it that way at the time. So I obviously just thought there's something wrong with me, right? That's what you do when you're not able, when there's no one to really support you in your ability to understand that your pain and your suffering is not unique, you will blame yourself for that pain and that suffering, which will only make that pain and that suffering worse. And you will attribute that pain and that suffering and that, in my case, that rupture of connection, right? That rejection of my own peers, as a sign that there's something wrong with you. Mm-hmm. And so I, with my writing and journalism and as I continued also my academic career in gender studies, I came to really understand that experience a lot better, and actually also see the way that, how helpful it is for me to understand the pain that my best friend was going through, given our society, given that he clearly had no way to manage his own emotions and to manage his own sense of rejection or actual rejection. I did not want to be his girlfriend. I loved him dearly, but there was no romantic, future for us. And so I wish that, I just think, wow, my life could have been completely different if maybe he had been taught how to manage that and not use violence, against me, and violence, I think, against himself. When you're hurting other people, you're also hurting yourself. I think I think about how different the world, my life could have been, but I also think about how different his life could have been, and I also have reflected a lot about the bullying that was happening amongst the men, the boys. I mean, the teenage boys who were bullying me, right? So to your point, in your question, there's a hierarchy within men and within boys, and it is not an enjoyable, place to be when you're not at the top, and most men are not at the top, and so and that's where race comes in. That's where gender identity, sexual orientation, religion, all of those things come in, where the boys that were at the bottom of that sort of masculinity totem pole at my school were the boys who were believed to be gay, were the boys who were feminine, were the boys who did not didn't have the right shoes or the right things to, didn't act they were poor. Like, it was just clear how all of these things intersected. And I think it's important for us to just, as parents, but just as like human beings in the world, to reflect on what it's like to grow up as a teenage boy, and what kind of struggles can occur, and how, to your point, to really have a system, a support system to make sure that men and boys, don't hurt others, but also don't hurt themselves.
Oh, I'm so sorry, Liz. It's funny because I think in a lot of ways, like, you and I are doing the same work, because, I talk a lot on the podcast about how in my own point of view, one of the things I teach all the time is how to take care of difficult feelings, right? Like I teach mindful parenting, and that's a big part of it, is how to take care of difficult feelings so that we're not so reactive. And also, so we're modeling that for our kids, and we're teaching our kids to do that. We have to do that for ourselves first. But like, nobody in our society is taught how to move through our difficult feelings, with skill at all. And I think of almost every big problem in the world that you talk about, like aggression, like the gun violence, all the big issues, like almost every single one can be traced back to usually a man not being able to take care of their difficult feelings, and like lashing out enormously in these hugely destructive ways. I don't know if I have a question here. I'm just like, it's so frustrating to me that this thing that is on top, like, is hurting so much of us. So I guess what I'm kind of asking you in a way is to think about, like, what are you advocating for the change? Like, what are we kind of wanting to shift to, and how can we start to take these steps to shift to it? I mean, besides just starting the conversation, which is an amazing step, but what do they need? What do men and boys need?
Yeah, I think that everything that you're saying is so important, and it's also so simple. But sometimes the simplest things are the hardest to do, and I think it really, I think girls also, and women are not always taught how to manage difficult emotions too. The difference between that we see in the research, though, is that when girls and women tend to take that violence inward, when they aren't able to process process trauma, and boys, some of them also take it inward, but there's a real stark difference where they tend to take it outward. So that aggression, again, can turn against others. It becomes a school shooting. It becomes a domestic abuse situation. It becomes, and the real issue here too, and crisis that we're not talking about is that it's not always outward, or sometimes the outward aggression that men and boys sort of display is also ends up being turned inward through suicide. Mm-hmm. So 80% of the people who die from suicide are men. Oh, and gosh. 2/3 of gun deaths in America are not school shootings. They're deaths by suicide. 2/3. So I think that that's a cry for help, right? Those are deaths of desperation. And that should signal to us that there is something, that the emotions of boys and men that are not being properly, there's not proper attendance to them or attention to them, or that men and boys, don't have the tools to process very difficult things. These are, undiagnosed mental health problems. And so this is a conversation around mental health. And I think it's, and again, to answer your question really specifically, I think it's about emotional education, right? That it's wild that you can graduate from years and years of, your entire, life, growing up before becoming an adult, being in school and learning about, the square root of whatever, and things that I, frankly, 90% of it I don't remember and have not used in my daily life. But I never learned about attachment theory. I never learned about, what my attachment style is, and how to be kind, and how to be in a relationship, and that how relationships are teaching assignments, that they're not meant to fix you, they're meant to heal you, and that they're meant to be, moments of growth, and that fights are normal. We're not taught how to fight, right? And those are the life skills that are, I think, lacking for all of us, but that we have a chance to sort of change. And so there's actually a lot of different programs now that are specifically focused on boys and emotional intelligence, basically. So EQ is starting to replace IQ as the best predictor of someone's success and someone's even financial success in their lives. So having emotional intelligence, obviously being smart is great, and I'm not diminishing what that can do for someone's life, but the emotional intelligence of a person is has just become much more important because of honestly the economic changes in our society. So we're moving from a manufacturing based economy to a service economy, right? The fastest growing jobs are jobs that actually require a lot of emotional labor. They're jobs that women tend to be quote unquote naturally better at, but we're all social beings, we're all emotional creatures. There's nothing about the male brain that is different. Really, it's a lot of this is in the way that we're socialized, in the way that we're raised. And so, yeah, if you're given a doll, you're learning about empathy. Play is, as you know, is actually, as adults, we think it's trivial, but for children, that's how they learn everything. So if we're selecting out, certain games and certain toys that teach empathy, that teach collaboration, that teach love and kindness, because it will make boys soft, or because it'll, that's not what they need. They're naturally rambunctious, and we have to teach everything through sports, which is, by the way, again, I'm not making this up. There's I documented in the book, there's a institute called the Gurian Institute. You can Google it. They get thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars from school boards every year to go into their classes and instruct teachers to make less eye contact with boys, to teach boys through sports, because that's the only way that they can actually learn, to be more aggressive with them, that some, and then obviously the flip side of all the things that they encourage, us to teach girls through tea parties and, whatever. So there's a real belief that, again, boys and girls are inherently different. And it's just not true, and this is not to deny that, we're all different, right? Like, we're all unique. Duh. We're all, little snowflakes, and we all have our individual DNAs and individual environments we grew up in. And yeah, we're all special and we're all different. But when we box kids into a certain learning curve or a certain learning, sort of technique, or sports is a good example. Like, I had this conversation with my dad a couple weeks ago after he read the book, and he had never talked to me or anyone about this before, but he was like, reading your book actually really made me think about how hard it was that I just didn't really like sports. Like, and I didn't like, now he's a cross country skier. Like, he's very active and athletic, but the quote unquote, like, traditional sports that were expected, that all the boys were expected to play, like soccer and, hockey or whatever. Those were he just wasn't good at it. And he just wasn't very interested in it. And he thought that there was something wrong with him, and, this is not to say boys shouldn't be in sports. It's like everyone who likes sports should do sports. And, we should encourage kids to be active, but we shouldn't be, I think, the idea of conscious parenting is the one that I ascribe to, which is, we are here to not mold our kids into a certain kind of way and mold them into a certain kind of adult. We're here to support their own fulfillment as human beings. And I think that sometimes that kind of gets lost when you look at the ways that, a lot of kids are boxed into a certain kind of, way of being raised, not just in the home, and even in very gender neutral homes, which was my home, by the way. Like, I only could play with my neighbor's Barbies, secondhand. I didn't get my own Barbies. I never, owned a Disney movie in my life. The only one that they let me watch was Bambi, which was too scary and sad for me.
So scary.
That's so God. Sad. It just made me cry all the time. So I was like, I just didn't grow up with that, but I was, obsessed with all that stuff because I was still exposed to it. You go to school, you go to friend's house, like, it's everywhere. So I think it's just, let's just be more conscious about that.
Well, it's interesting because, the whole debate about, are there innate differences between men and women biologically? It seems like there's, basically we're, for the vast majority of us, we're the same. And then there are some differences. Obviously, they have stronger muscles and more testosterone and things like that. But it doesn't even matter, because if
Yeah,
boys are committing
exactly.
suicide more, and if they're like, we're having all these problems with aggression, and they're boxed in, and they're unable to, like, we're having all these incredible problems, then who cares if there are biological differences?
Yeah.
Like, we still need to be, you're right,
Yeah.
we all need to have an emotional education. We need to be taught how to take care of difficult feelings and communicate skillfully. Like, it doesn't even matter. So
Yeah. I find it bizarre that we obsess about it. I really do. I think that it's, again, and not to say that we have not done this, and it still occurs, but like, it's like being obsessed if, white people are inherently smarter than black people. It's so, it's so degrading. And thankfully it's, I think generally looked down upon to make those kinds of arguments, although some people are still making them or they're still embedded in our culture. But it's just, or that straight people are inherently, I don't know what, than gay people. Like, who cares? Like let's just make the world a good place, whoever you are, and this obsession with trying to prove either one, to me is not the interesting debate. It really isn't. We won't live in a world where someone is not exposed to nature or nurture. It's impossible unless we go back to a time where we could, do experiments that, violated every law of ethic possible.
Mm-hmm.
We can't raise kids in test tubes and leave them alone in a dark room and see what happens. So let's just, try and make the best of the world that we have, and acknowledge the fact that, yes, we are human beings who are hardwired for certain things. We're hardwired for connection. We're hardwired to want to be loved and to feel like we matter. We're also we're a social species. So we're always going to imitate. We're always going to learn from others. And so why don't we just make that as much of a positive process as we can, and make that learning, create models of learning that make the world a better place and everyone more free to be who they want to be.
Well, this is so interesting because it goes into so many directions, right? If we think about what the solution is, because you talked about we always imitate, we always learn, and I always say, like, the kids are great, terrible at doing what we say, but great at doing what we do, right? Like, it's really about
Right.
who we are in some ways as parents. So I'm wondering, like, there's a lot of questions here, I guess, for both moms and for dads.
Mm-hmm.
Like, for women, right? I think that the listeners, you mostly are women here, and there are some men. Hey, shout out, guys. We want to be looking at ourselves, right? Like, we want to be looking at ourselves and our assumptions. So I'm wondering if there are some certain places, Liz, that you would recommend for women, for moms raising boys, where we can look at our beliefs and our assumptions and maybe the language we use and kind of check ourselves. Can you identify any places for that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a million amazing people who my book would not have been possible without them, because they have been studying and researching this topic for years and decades. I'm thinking of obviously Michael Kimmel, of Jackson Katz, who have created, I think, really, really good pieces of scholarship and research, but also really accessible stuff. Jackson Katz has this TED Talk that went viral, where he, talks about the way that even, how our language is so gendered, right? So I also think a really good, just a film, like a really, I think digestible film is called The Mask We Live In, which is created by the Misrepresentation Project, which is an amazing organization, again, to just start with too, where they basically talk to several experts and interview several experts, and lay out, I think, the crisis that is occurring with boys in America. And I would also point you to organizations like A Call to Men. I actually donated all the proceeds from any proceeds I made from my book tour to that organization, because they're really on the ground doing stuff. They're creating programs for men and boys. So you can actually, find some of their, not just get their curriculum and get some of the support you might need when you're raising a boy, but they also, they organize workshops, they organize events. There are amazing, I think models out there like Wade Davis, like Matt McGorry, Thomas Page McBee. These are men who are, just I think really good people to just follow and to use as even conversation starters. I think with your sons, because I also think they're kind of cool, like Matt McGorry is like a celebrity, like that's cool. He's on TV and he's, in many ways like your prototypical sort of alpha male, but he's also really wrestled with a lot of these questions. And so, that's where I would point you to. I think. Yeah.
I mean, respectfully, like I'm psyched to have all these resources, but oftentimes my listener is like listening while doing other things, right? And the podcast is great because it's a great way to take in information without having to go do a bunch of things. So I'm wondering, like, I guess one of the things that off the top of my head that I would want to like kind of identify and kind of point in here would be say like, don't cry, right? Like you don't say that to any kid, right? Yeah. Like, but what are some of the, but I think it's really helpful to like lay these basics out to say, you are allowed to have these feelings. Like what are some tangible, I guess that's what I'm kind of reaching for. It's like some tangible things that
I think in the same way that again, we've thought about what we're telling girls, that I think a common instruction recently has been, don't validate her just based on her looks, right? So don't necessarily, tell her how pretty she looks. Maybe tell her how you love how curious she is, or how adventurous she is, or how kind she is, right? I think the same thing relates to boys. So how are you complimenting your son? How are you validating him in the world? And so, if it's constantly on, look how strong you are, I don't know, things, I think we fall into even sort of weird scripts with boys and girls of like conquering and that it's acceptable for young, boys to, I think, be unkind to girls because they like them, right? That he's bullying her pigtails because he likes her. Like, no, that's not cool. I think that you can teach consent from a really, really young age. We associate consent with sex, and obviously it is very primordial in sex, but it is something that you can start teaching your son and daughter, by the way, whatever their gender is. Does that other child want to play with you? Did you ask them if you could play with them first, right? If they are told no, and they are feeling mad, process those emotions with them, right? Teach them that it doesn't mean that there's something wrong with them. It just means that person doesn't feel like it. There could be a million reasons why they are, quote unquote, rejecting you in that moment, but it's actually not a rejection, right? So these, there are a million examples of the ways that you can talk about consent from a really young age without ever mentioning sex or without ever mentioning your, his body or her body. And I think that the other thing, particularly for, I don't think there's an age that's too young to teach this, but the flip side, we often focus on how to teach boys not to hurt girls, but we don't teach them how to love girls, right? Like we teach them how not to rape, but we don't teach them how to flirt. So I think that the flip side is, teaching particularly teenage boys, how do you seduce a girl? How do you, courtship is really important. It's really stress inducing. And if you don't talk about it, they're going to rely on what's on the internet or, what their friends are saying. And maybe they have amazing friends. Maybe they just watch, very educational shows and have never watched porn, but chances are they're getting that sexual education elsewhere. And so fill the void, and make those conversations positive. It's often so negative in the way that we have them. Even when I think about my conversation around, sex, it's like, don't do this and don't do that and don't get caught this, and don't catch this. And I think that we forget about love. We forget about, how important it is for men to be taught how to read a woman's nonverbal signs, right? How to tell if someone is interested in you, not just based on what they're saying with their mouth, but saying with their body. And one final thing I would say is, something that was told to me by a professor in masculinity, who said, gender is like a Swiss Army knife. That there's all kinds of different tools, right? There's magnifying glass, there's a knife, there's, the corkscrew. And for, raising boys is not about taking away any of those tools. It's not about saying you can't be violent. It's not about saying you can never be competitive. It's not about saying you can never want to, get the girl. It's about expanding the tools. It's about giving them more ways to express themselves in the world, so that, if the moment is right and something, asks for it, then maybe aggression or dominance is called on as a response. But that should not be the only response, right? So many men, when I interviewed them, told me, I'm either angry or I'm not angry. Like, those are the only two emotions I know. And I want boys to grow up being able to really label how they feel, to be in touch with how they feel, not be encouraged to disconnect from how they feel. Because as you know, that's the most dangerous thing we can do for any human being, to have them disassociate from their feelings and from who they are is the best way to set up our society entirely to fail. Those people will end up, again, hurting themselves or hurting others. That's the seed of addiction. That's the seed of so much of the world's biggest problems. And if we can help people manage their pain and work through their pain and be brave enough to do that, right? To describe that as the bravest thing that a man can do,
absolutely,
feel his feelings. I think that will not just make the world a better place for those men, but again, for the women around them. How many, women have told me, that dating has been a really big challenge for them.
Yeah. Yeah, well, Liz,
because they don't feel married to men. They feel like a rehab center for them.
Oh man.
Ooh,
don't even get me started. Liz, there are so many questions I could continue to ask you about this, but I want to be respectful of your time. Everyone, go get the book, For the Love of Men. It's so wonderful. Where can people find you if they want to reach out and have questions and things like that?
Yeah, so I'm. If you search Liz Plank, you'll find me. But I'm Feminist Tabulous on Twitter, on Instagram. I'm Liz Plank on TikTok because that's where the kids are. I have no business being there, but I enjoy it a lot. I'm on Facebook. And you can get the book wherever you get your books. I encourage you to get them from your local bookstores. If they don't have it, you can tell them to order it. Support those places that are so important.
And thank you for putting this book out, for starting this conversation, bringing it out there, for doing all the sharing of yourself in this book that you're doing. I think that it's really valuable, and I really appreciate your effort and all of that. Thank you.
Thank you. I really appreciate it too. It was so great talking with you. And thank you for all the work that you're doing. I think it's so crucial. And I know that it can't be easy juggling all of these jobs that you have. I really appreciate it too.
Thank you so much for listening to the Mindful Mama podcast and to this amazing episode. I mean, yes, this is such a conversation that we need to have. We need to talk about boys. We need to help them, with this, understand their emotions so it's not driving so much hurt. It is a big driver of harmful generational patterns, and we can start to change it bit by bit. So I am so happy, so happy that you have listened to this episode and that you are thinking about these issues, and let's bring it out into the world. Let's share this conversation, start this conversation with others, share this episode with others if that helps start that conversation, and share it with the people of all genders in our lives so that we can start this conversation beyond just women. So cool. So thank you so much for listening. If you want to hang out with me IRL in real life, I'm extending a most loving invitation for you to join me at the Mindful Mama Retreat on March 1st, day-long retreat in Philadelphia. And you can get tickets for that at mindfulmamamentor.com/retreat. And if you happen to be really far away, you can't make it for some reason, I'm having an online, free event to help free us from harmful, sabotaging beliefs that we have. And it's called the Unmartyr Yourself Challenge. And it'll be starting on March 24th. And that you can sign up for at mindfulmamamentor.com/unmartyr. That's UNMARTYR. So I hope to see you at one of those. Both of those would be amazing. I would love that. And otherwise, I'm just wishing you a beautiful week. I'm wishing you peace. I'm wishing you perspective and awareness and rest. And all those things that we need, right? I'm wishing you time to take care of you this week. Okay. Thank you so much for listening, my friend. Namaste.